All right, everybody, it's 5 o'clock. We'll go ahead and start the work session. Work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there's generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings. I think we've got Commissioner Webb, Commissioner Thompson. I don't see Commissioner Bangs.
I just checked with Commissioner Bangs. She said she might be late because she's driving from work to home.
Okay, and then I haven't heard from Commissioner Toyoka. Has anybody heard from Commissioner Toyoka today? Okay. All right. Well,
Chair Quilla, Commissioner Toyoka mentioned to me the other day that he was going to be out of town today. He was going to let you know that. Okay. Thank you, County Manager. Well, we'll go ahead and discuss the formal agenda. Has everybody had an opportunity to review it? And any questions, comments? Okay. If nothing, we'll go ahead to the first topic, which is the appointment to Recreational Lands Planning and Advisory Committee. We have 5 minutes assigned for this, and it's on page 4. And is it going to be Steve Meshke? Are you going to be presenting on this?
Yeah, I am. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, my computer keeps crashing on me, doing weird things. So tonight we've been advertising for another position. We've had one opening on our committee for over a year now, and Mike Hinton has reapplied. He's been on our committee in previous years. He's been on there for almost 15 years. He took a couple year hiatus there, a little break, and he's ready to come back. He's looking for something to do. He's a great person. He's got a lot of background in the parks. He's part of the Seaside Parks Committee down there. He attends the Oregon Parks Association meetings, and he's actively involved in quite a few events and other county things as far as the COVID and stuff like that. So he likes volunteering and likes doing the stuff. I think he'd be a great addition back to our committee. He's got a lot of history. Like I said, he was part of our committee when we did our Parks Master Plan back in 2006. So he brings a lot of background knowledge to the committee. And I don't know if you guys have any questions for me about him, or about the topic, or if you have any other ideas or any other potential volunteers for the committee.
I see Commissioner Webb has her hand up.
I just want to say that I'm absolutely delighted that Tom has decided to come back to us. As with what Steve said, the fact that he's been around, he's very, very involved throughout the county, actually, in parks development and programs for kids. And I'm just delighted that we talked him into coming back. And he's going to be a great addition, re-addition.
Re-addition.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Webb. Any other comments, questions? Suggestions?
Well, I guess I can bring it to the next board meeting then. I can put it on the consent calendar and bring the formal, to get the formal appointment if there's no other questions from you guys.
That sounds great to us. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a good night. We'll move on to the second topic, which is the fiscal year 2021-22 third quarter financials. On page 7, we have 10 minutes assigned to this, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer Carlson.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, and I can't see everyone now since I'm sharing the screen, so if you have a question, please just speak up. I'm going over the third quarter quarterly financials. Ending March 31st, 2022. Just some general highlights. Overall, the general fund resources and expenditures year to date are on target with the budget. The general fund ending fund balance for the 21-22 fiscal year is projected to be within the Board of Commissioner policies. The other special funds, the resources and expenditures year to date are on target with their budgets and where we would expect them to be. And staff will continue to monitor spending in order to remain in compliance with budget law. So jumping into the general fund here, revenue year to date as of March 31st, the general fund has received 20.3 million or 85% of the budgeted resources. For expenses year to date, we've expended 19.1 million or 66% of the budget, which is right where we would want to be at 75% of the year. And then moving on to a summary of the general fund. Just a couple key notes here under special payments. I know this is small, so I apologize. Under special payments, this marked A, 200,000 of the budget there is unexpended. That is for the public road and drainage improvements, and Public Works does not anticipate spending this in the current fiscal year. Moving on to a little more detail on the general fund resources. A couple things I have noted here. Under county tourism, room tax collected is above the $215,000 that we budgeted. And then the STR application fees are also above the $500 that we budgeted. So those are coming in high. Moving down to point B, clerk, admin, and elections. The elections have collected 31,000 in election fees when we had only budgeted 12,000. So those are coming in quite high as well. Moving down to point C, under clerk recordings, recording fees are up 30,000 from the budgeted 245,000. Moving to D, dues and special assessments, room tax, as we've talked about before, is coming in higher than the budget. And E, for the planning division, the planning division has received the entire amount of the budgeted transfer from video lottery. So for the 22-23 year budget, staff will work with the state for a more accurate revenue forecasting for that video lottery money. Moving to—
Wait, I have a question, please.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I don't think you can see me.
I can't. Thank you.
Thank you. So Commissioner Thompson, wondering, this video lottery money, AOC staff has been very active because it's a statewide program with statewide implications for every county. And the state has been shortchanging us for years and years and years. So to the extent that staff works with and through AOC staff, I think our impact is magnified, if I could offer that suggestion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on to general fund requirements. Just a couple notable things that I have on here. We see our county council budget is a little above the 75% mark as of March 31st. So that's something we're keeping an eye on. We'll keep an eye and make sure we stay in compliant with our budget law. In addition to that, the Sheriff's Support Division is a little over that 75% mark. And that was due to, they had budgeted for a CHL printer in special projects, but the cost of that equipment came in, or office equipment came in much lower. It was under the $5,000 capital threshold. So they purchased this out of their departmental budget, but they believe that they'll have savings within their budget to account for that. So, but we are keeping an eye on that as well. Any questions on the general fund requirements? Okay, moving on to all the funds, all the special funds. I've just noted a couple things here for the general fund stabilization. This fund receives the timber revenues that exceed the budgeted amount per the long-term financial plan. We are anticipating or projecting to receive $420,000 in the current fiscal year in the general fund stabilization account. Moving down to the COVID fund, point B, what you're seeing there, that $10,000 is revenue, is the interest earned on the revenues that's sitting in the LGIP. We are anticipating receiving the remaining 3.9 million in ARPA funding this month of May. Moving down to point C, we've touched on this before. This is the safe dividend. We did receive a large dividend in this current year, but this is something that we don't budget for because we don't know if we will receive a substantial dividend or not. There's no way of knowing that during the budget process. So any questions on all fund resources? Okay, moving on to expenditures for all the
I'm
funds.
sorry, Jennifer.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Commissioner Webb. About those insurance reserve funds, what happens when we get a chunk of money like that? Where does it go? And what do we do with it?
It stays in that insurance reserve fund, and it's used to pay if we have any claims or insurance in future claims that come through. That's a savings for that. So
it just stays there.
Yes.
So is that something, for instance, that we invest? Does that go into our?
We do invest. If we have a big enough balance, I would have to check if we have any invested in that fund right now. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
But if there is a substantial balance, we are investing those funds.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the requirements, just a couple things to note. That video lottery fund. Well, the one thing I want to know every time is a lot of these funds have individual contingencies. So that's why their expenses appear low compared to that 75% mark, is because that's including their budgeted contingency that is not spent. And moving to point A, video lottery fund, we've transferred 100% of the budgeted transfer to the planning department. So the remainder of that fund is at 75% expended. So that's right in line with where we want to be. And then for the road district number 1, we've transferred 96% of the budgeted transferred to general roads, but the county won't transfer more than what is budgeted. So there's nothing to worry about there. Any questions on that? Any questions overall? That is all I have.
So, Chair Coelho, if I might real quick. So since we just got out of the budget committee meeting and we'll go back tomorrow, I think that, what is the good news is that the budget year is really going as expected. And what happens every year is that as we go through the fiscal year, we accrue additional savings on the expense side, which always helps fortify the fund balance at the end of the year. And so right now, staff is also communicating with the departments to make sure that as we go into the end of the fiscal year, that folks are very cautious about their expenditures to make sure that the fund balance is as healthy as it can be moving forward. And that's something we do regularly. So kind of how our fiscal controls work and our judiciousness is really a 12-month, 365-day a year process. So I just want to reinforce that with the board.
Yeah, thank you, County Manager. Any questions? Okay, not seeing any. Great, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
You too. Long day. Thanks. We'll move on to item 3, which is House Bill 3012 and Senate Bill 391, which is Rural Accessory Dwelling Units, ADUs, page 18. And it's, we have 20 minutes assigned for this. And I think we will be turning it over to, let me just look and see who I'm turning it over to. Is our Community Development Director presenting on this, Gail Henriksen?
Yes,
okay.
I
am. Hi, Gail.
Thank you.
I know
it was confusing because it wasn't a short-term rental topic, so
it was
unclear who would be presenting this.
It is hard to reconcile here. Wow.
Yes, but thank you for the opportunity, and I think we'll find this a lot more interesting and hopefully a little less controversial.
Great.
So we're here tonight just to give some basic information and background and get get a few policy questions answered about a couple of House bills, a House bill and a Senate bill that have been adopted at the state legislature level. And these two bills are optional for the county. We're not required to do anything with them, but we can if we choose to. And the provisions in both bills deal with accessory dwelling units on rural lands. And so just to give you a little background about how accessory dwelling units or ADUs operate in the county right now, they're allowed only in zones that are designated as development. So these are typically where we have our most intense development in unincorporated county. They're zones that are served by a sanitary sewer system, and they're permitted basically as an over-the-counter type of permits. Type 1, there's no public notice, no public hearing, and they're allowed in the Arch Cape community, and then in our rural community multifamily, and there's some of that out in the Westport area, and then also in our rural community residential areas, and there's a lot of that around Miles Crossing and Jeffers Garden areas primarily where you'll see that zoning designation. We do have some basic development standards right now for accessory dwelling units, mainly related to maximum size or floor area of the unit, and then just some basic requirements. You can only have one per lot or parcel, and you already have to have your single family house on the property. And so when we talk about rural lands, this new legislation is actually pretty exciting because previously we could not have accessory dwelling units in our rural lands. And when we talk about rural lands, we're talking about the areas that aren't in an urban growth boundary and that aren't considered farm or forest lands. So it's our most common zoning designations here would be your RA1, RA2, RA5. It's also the coastal residential and the coastal beach residential, and then our single family residential 1 zone. And we've put a rough estimate of the number of parcels that are in each of those zones throughout unincorporated county. And then, because nothing can ever be simple in the world of planning, guest houses and accessory dwelling units are different from each other. Even though they're kind of the same, they're really not. An accessory dwelling unit is basically a little house, and it can have a kitchen, you can rent it out, people can stay there indefinitely. A guest house is really just that. It's a temporary non-paying lodging that is really there for when your mother-in-law comes down to visit for a month and you don't want her in the house with you that whole time. That's a good place to have your mother-in-law stay. It doesn't have cooking facilities, it doesn't have separate meters, and it's a much smaller maximum size limit than an accessory dwelling unit would be. However, we do allow guest houses in all of our rural lands and our rural residential zones. So before I go into House Bill 3012, I just wanted to stop and see if there's any questions about accessory dwelling units or guest houses or how we currently operate right now.
Not seeing any.
Okay, so we'll move on then to House Bill 3012. This actually was adopted back in 2017, and it was sort of the gateway into allowing accessory dwelling units on our rural residential lands. In this particular bill, the caveat was in order to construct your ADU, you already had to have an existing historic home on the property. And so they defined historic home as being built sometime between 1850 and 1945. So if you had a historic home, you could build a new residence on your property, a new ADU. You could then had to convert your historic home into an accessory structure, and then you got your nice new residence as your main home. And this bill did have some minimum requirements to it. You have to have at least a 2-acre parcel, and if for some reason your ADU burnt down, you would not be able to reconstruct it. You couldn't do a second ADU on the property, and there was never any discussion about whether or not you could use your accessory dwelling unit as a short-term rental, because if we're going to have a meeting, we have to say the word short-term rental. But so there were some weaknesses in this bill, and a lot of that does get addressed, I think, when we get to Senate Bill 391. The county, of course, because this is optional, we don't have to do anything with it, and we haven't done anything with it since it was adopted, but we're putting it on the table now for your consideration. So I'll stop at House Bill 3012 and see, are there any questions about this particular bill?
Mr. Thompson.
Well, because heck yeah, let's talk about housing. If what we're talking about is a kind of a, I want to say a gradual or a modest increase that could have a widespread but manageable impact, that was how I looked at this bill. Is that a fair characterization, do you suppose, or would you have different ways to describe it? I mean, I know that when we're talking about additional housing and we're talking about neighbors' concerns about the rate of change and the amount of change, we're talking about people's perception of their well-being, their physical, emotional, cultural well-being, and their property values, because all of that is wrapped up in housing of any kind. So it's a more philosophical question, which may not be fair at this point, but I'm trying to think about how to talk to neighbors about this in a way that is constructive and minimizes potential conflicts.
I'll take your possible out of being a philosophical question and maybe not fair at this time, because I think I have an answer for you, Commissioner.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to help us think about why we should act on this, because we all are aware that there's a housing shortage, and we all know that attempts to deal with houseless population, with the lack of affordable workforce housing, the lack of housing really at every level, we're dealing with change, because things have to change here if we are going to accept more population. And there's more population around us. There are more people who want to come here. How do we do that in a way that is constructive rather than destructive of a sense of community? That's what I'm looking for. And I'll stop philosophizing, but that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so moving on to Senate Bill 391. This is a much more recent bill that was adopted in 2021. In many ways, a lot of the standards and provisions that are in House Bill 3012, for example, minimum parcel size, carry over into Senate Bill 391. But one of the main differences is that you do not have to have a historic home on the property. So if you built your home in 2021, under this bill, if we wanted to move forward with it, you could come in and apply to construct an accessory dwelling unit on your property as well. Senate Bill 391 did close a loophole that in my conversations with other planning directors across the state was of pretty significant concern, and that was prohibiting the use of the structure as a short-term rental. And so that's really important to note if we want to move forward, that is baked into state statute. So we can't change that, it's there. And Senate Bill 391 is really closely tied to a companion bill, which is Senate Bill 762. 762 deals with the wildfire risk management side of this, because there is a concern as you open up rural lands that are in close proximity to or maybe forested themselves, that we're going to up our fire risk increase. And so there has been a lot of work tied to Senate Bill 762 that has to be completed before anybody in the state can move forward with Senate Bill 391. So Senate Bill 762 required two things to be done before we can move forward. One is to create and revise that definition of wildland urban interface. And that was done, I believe, around the end of last year in December. And they've created that definition. they are in the process right now of wrapping up the wildfire risk maps, and that's taken a lot more time. That work is supposed to be completed by June 30th of this year. And once those maps are done and accepted and approved, then throughout the state, local governments can then move forward with implementing Senate Bill 391 if they choose to. Again, this is something that's optional. We're not required as the county to do it. And that's a policy question that your board will have to give us some direction on. We took this to the Planning Commission back in January just to get some initial discussion going and something that we could take forward to your board to give an idea of where the Planning Commission was, how the Planning Commission was looking at this. So I think one of the main ideas they wanted everyone to be aware of and the board to be aware of is that they were very keen on endorsing the use of existing housing stock in order to advance our goals for affordable housing and workforce housing. And one of the ideas that they promoted was that the county should be working to encourage and promote accessory dwelling units in zones where they're already permitted. So think back the Arch Cape zone out in Miles Crossing, Jeffers Gardens, and out in that Westport area where we have that type of zoning where ADUs are allowed now. In their discussions, the Planning Commission also talked about how to handle the process, the approval process for this, because that is something that we as the county would have to decide if we're going to move forward with this. And so where ADUs right now are pretty much an over-the-counter permit with no public hearing and no public notice, one of the recommendations from the Planning Commission in those initial discussions was that we should look at having public hearings to approve ADUs, and that perhaps as time went on after 3 or 5 years, if it wasn't creating problems in neighborhoods, if it wasn't, becoming a controversial issue, that maybe that could be scaled back and you wouldn't have to require those public hearings. One of their other recommendations was to prohibit ADUs inside hazard areas. So inside your tsunami inundation zone, in a floodplain or special flood area, and in areas that are prone to landslides. And then we talked a bit about parking and whether or not there should be additional parking spaces depending on the size of the unit. And then whether or not ADUs should be allowed to have garages or outbuildings, because that also changes the character of the neighborhood. As you've got a main house with a big garage and a big outbuilding, and now you've got your accessory dwelling unit that maybe now has a detached garage and it's got its own shop over here as well. So things that they were thinking about. And then there was also some discussion about maybe having a geographic limitation or some basic prerequisites in order to allow an ADU in an area. So looking at maybe zones that are closer to public transit in case they are being used for housing for people who may not have their own vehicles or maybe only have one vehicle and need that extra public transit to get to work or school or doctor's appointments. And then also making sure that they might be in close proximity to basic services. So things like grocery, medical appointments, and things like that. And I see Commissioner Webb has her hand.
Yeah, I do, Gail. Was there any discussion about minimum lot sizes by the Planning Commission? I mean, existing parcel size.
Yeah, so under Senate Bill 391, it would require a minimum 2-acre parcel. So, and we can't change that one. So that would always be required. We did talk with the Planning Commission about whether or not maybe we should require a bigger minimum parcel size than 2 acres. And the consensus from that discussion was that 2 acres was sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I see Commissioner Thompson, Commissioner Banks.
Yes, ma'am. Well, so it seems to me that some of these points work at cross purposes, because if we are going to use the existing housing base to advance the goal, then any constraint that we add works against increasing that. So I find that a little confusing. I'd like to see a map of the hazard areas, the tsunami inundation zone, flood. Are we using FEMA floodplain? Whose definition of flood and landslide? Because I've seen some landslide maps that are pretty terrifying and widespread. So I wonder how much buildable land in terms of ADUs would be left with if these, it may be too much to do, but if I could see the overlays about the impact of each one of these proposed constraints, that would help me form a policy. Thank you.
And Commissioner Bates.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not really interested in a public hearing, public notice, published ad, sign posted on a property type situation, especially if ADUs by state law are required or only allowable on acreage of two acres or more. I guess I just don't want to increase staffing costs. I don't want to increase I don't know. I mean, I'm interested in this ADU concept, you know, because we are in a housing crisis. But I guess I just don't think that we need such a high level of oversight. I don't know. So thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just ask a follow-up question, please? I wonder, I'm familiar with Arch Cape Design Review. And so whenever I see some of the, like the public hearing and public notice and all of that, and I've actually heard my neighbors say, oh, we don't like development here, which kind of surprised me because none of us would have a home if somebody didn't develop it. So I don't want to go too far in the idea that one neighbor can tell another neighbor what their home has to look like, what kind of shrubbery they have to have, and all of those kind of what I view as overreaches of neighbor against neighbor. Just putting that out there too. Thank you.
Okay, so actually your discussion right now is really touching on a lot of the questions that staff was bringing to your board this evening for some direction. Things about, should we have public hearings? What level of review and approval should we have? And is it something that should be applied geographically? Is it something that should just be one size fits all out of the box? You know, do we want to look at the hazard zone? And I apologize, Commissioner, because our web maps is not working completely, but you can kind of, I don't know how I did that, but so these are the area that's in gray is outside the floodplain. The area that is in this gold color, which isn't showing up, but that's most of the county. You can't see it, but trust me, it's most of the county. We did pull this map up at the Planning Commission and actually looked at it, because by the time you do add your tsunami, your flood, and your geohazard layer, there is just a little bit of area that's left. Part of it's out by Fishhawk Lake and a little bit down in the south part of the county. But there is a lot of land that is in hazard areas where people do develop on a regular basis. But we do have limited land outside those hazard areas. So again, that was one of our questions. Also about, you know, should we have additional parking requirements? Should we have allow ADUs to have, you know, outbuildings or garages? And as we move forward, you know, what other types of amenities would we want to allow or maybe prohibit in terms of an accessory dwelling unit versus a primary dwelling? I see Commissioner Banks has her hand up.
I guess I'm just looking at this list, and I don't think we should have public hearings for ADU on rural land. I don't think that we should have public hearings for parking spaces or new ADUs or a garage or an outbuilding. We're talking about rural land. I feel like we should allow landowners to be individuals in the choices that they make in regards to the rural lands that they own. And frankly, my lack of physical proximity to grocery and medical I don't think that that should have any bearing on whether or not I want to develop an auxiliary dwelling unit on our property here. So I guess I'm just kind of in a position of less oversight is more for my constituents, and allowing them to have anonymity and control over their own properties. So that's where I'm at.
I see Commissioner Webb. You have a question too.
Yeah, I largely agree with what Commissioner Bangs has said, with the exception, of course, of tsunami, flood, and landslides. I mean, I just and I realize that that's very limiting in this county, but I just think it's irresponsible to have any facilities that are in any kind of inundation zone. Otherwise, I think that if we write the code well enough, that we don't need to have a whole lot of other public review. And I'd like to be able to minimize that. ADUs, my only experience with ADUs is in urban areas. And they really have, for instance, in the city of Portland, they really have increased the housing supply dramatically, and have, I think, enhanced the design quality of a lot of neighborhoods. But as I say, I agree with Commissioner Bangs that I think the review process should be at a minimum. And I definitely don't think that they need to be in physical proximity to services. And public transit, we have so little public transit in this county that I think we'd be writing off a lot of very nice locations for a home if we did that. So that's my way in. Thanks.
Was it Commissioner Thompson first and then Commissioner Banks? Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you, sir. Well, I kind of agree with what both of my colleagues have said. Here's what I think. We should give neighbors maximum control over their own land. In terms of the hazard zones, because so much of what we have here is hazard zone, I would allow it, but I would require publicizing it in terms of when somebody rents or leases or whatever, that they are aware that they are in a hazard zone and what that hazard zone looks like and steps that they can take to deal with the hazards. In that sense of forewarned is forearmed. I live pretty close to a tsunami zone, but I know that. And then it's my choice. And if people want to choose, because that's the only housing they have and they're willing to take the chance, I think we ought to give them that chance, but it should be with full disclosure. So I like that. And the rest of the constraints, we don't need to be constraining those. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Banks.
Well, and to just follow up Commissioner Thompson, I think it should be allowed in hazard zones because a majority of Clatsop County is allowed in a hazard zone. I don't think that, I don't think that we've been quiet about the fact that, hey guys, we all live in a hazard zone. If you visit us, you're going to be in a hazard zone. It's really difficult to not know that when you come visit. And so I guess, yeah, I feel like, sure, it could be disclosed, but I just don't want to increase staffing, like for something as simple as auxiliary dwelling units. I guess I don't feel like that needs to be something that has to be posted. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's for further discussion. We can talk about the pros and cons of it, but I just don't want to increase staffing for something that I feel like is common sense. But maybe I'm giving too much credit to folks. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Bang. Commissioner Webb?
Yeah, I'm assuming that from your previous slides that we would definitely not allow ADUs to be used as short-term rentals. Am I correct in that, Gail?
Correct. Under the Senate Bill 391, you cannot use it as a short-term rental.
Right. And I think that's, I think that's an very important component. But I kind of like Commissioner Thompson's idea about letting people know, especially, do you have any idea, Gail, like how, I don't know, how other coastal communities handle notifications or you know, because I assume that particularly what we're talking about here is a rental, which is what we're trying to, of course, you know, improve our numbers of. So do you have any idea what other coastal communities do about this notification issue? I wonder if that's something that DLCD ever talks about, or what do you know about this? About
Well,
the warning?
with regard to accessory dwelling units under Senate Bill 391, this is all very new and everybody is putting together their own special regulations on it. And I have not surveyed other counties on that. So some jurisdictions do have tsunami hazard overlay zones where, you know, there's a disclaimer when you purchase a property that basically says you are buying a property in the tsunami hazard zone, buyer beware. But I don't know that counties have necessarily gotten involved with rental notices for long-term rentals and overseeing them. I'm not aware of a county, which doesn't mean it's not out there, but a coastal county that has any type of rental registration program for long-term rentals. So we would have to, you know, create that program and then staff it. And
well, and couldn't we, maybe that's something we could ask our county council to look into for us, because I wouldn't think that it would require much staff to implement something like that. That would simply be an additional part of a rental agreement. Because I like the idea. I really like the idea of minimizing, you know, our oversight, and just have it be kind of common. I don't know. I think that's a legal issue, probably. Do we have the power to do that, I guess, is what I'm saying. Whoa.
okay. And just since GIS is working right now, I did pull up our county map. And so the areas that are not gray, and I don't have the tsunami on, but these are the areas that are in the flood or in the geologic hazard area. So you can see that it's really the areas out on the east side that are up in our forest lands where you're most likely to find property that's not going to be in a flood or a landslide area. So.
And did we have, is it Commissioner Thompson, then Commissioner Bangs, or Commissioner Bangs first? Commissioner Bangs.
So I would just say I'm not interested in controlling that because as per the map, I'm in one of those zones. And so if we start controlling the long-term rental agreements of personal landowners and their long-term rentals, I feel like that is a slippery slope. And I don't want to be a part of that slippery slope because it like, why, I guess, why would we want to control a landowner's long-term rental lease? I would have something against that, as my family owns long-term rentals in the Napa area. So yeah, I guess I don't want to dive down that slippery slope of micromanagement. And that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner Bangs. Commissioner Thompson?
With respect, I am for personal autonomy whenever possible. All I'm suggesting is that it be part of a rental agreement that says this parcel, this unit is in a zone, and you know that. It's kind of like a HIPAA notice. Kind of everybody signs it and it goes away. The other thing is, do we have any way to impact the state rental laws? Because I've heard a lot of landowners or property owners who who are reluctant now to do long-term renting because the state laws don't give them really much control over bad tenants. They've told me, I prefer to do short-term rentals because I have more control over bad behavior on the part of tenants. And maybe that's for county council, and maybe, I don't know if anybody else cares about that or thinks about that, but if we're talking about the autonomy that a property owner has, it's been impacted for long-term rentals by state laws. So we already have that layer of control over the business operations of a landlord, unless ADUs are somehow exempted from those rental laws. The planning director, do you know about that particular issue?
I do not, so I will defer to county council. I would also suggest, and the county manager may want to weigh in on this, but you do have your PacWest lobbying firm. And this may be an issue that you want to take up with them as they move forward in the next legislative session.
So if I could answer that question, Chair and Commissioners, I believe generally local governments have been preempted in this area, but I would have to double check and research that to just double check that. But my general understanding is they've been preempted, but I will verify that and get back with you.
Yeah, this has been good discussion. I happen to agree with Commissioner Banks. I really want to try to keep us out of as many of these things as possible. I do think that when you're building a structure of accessory dwelling unit, you're going to have to deal with getting that permit and building and all of the restrictions upon it. So I think that's enough.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Just to let you know, moving forward, we as staff will be working on some amendments then to our code, just based on your direction this evening. We would take them back for an initial review and discussion to the Planning Commission, have them make a formal recommendation to you, and then bring them back in a workshop for your board, probably maybe in September, October timeframe, and then depending on your direction at that time, move forward with an ordinance later in the year or early next year. We're trying to move as quickly as possible because we do realize there is actually a lot of demand out there for this. We do get a lot of calls, so we would like to keep it moving forward. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Director Hendrickson. Appreciate it. Last item is the Bridge Lane Public Bridge on page 68 of the packet, and we have 10 minutes for this. And Terry Hendricks, I'll turn it over to Terry.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Bridge Lane is a public road located just about 1/1500th of a mile north of the Tillamook-Clatsop County line. And on that public road, there is a public bridge, and it accesses a private subdivision known as Riverside Estates. It was dedicated in 1977, and that road and bridge is currently the only access to that subdivision. The bridge was originally constructed in 1936, moved to the site where it currently resides in the mid-70s, and it has been load rated since 2013 at 27 tons. We received a request to start hauling logs over it last year, and due to that request, we couldn't allow the log trucks because they're closer to 50 tons. And so we were concerned about the condition of the bridge. Being a public bridge, we have jurisdiction over that. It doesn't mean we can spend any money on it, but we get to determine what goes on with that bridge. Subsequently, we contacted ODOT and aided the homeowners association in getting the bridge reassessed. And recently in April, that load rating come back at 7 tons. That 7 tons will allow an emergency ambulance to cross it, but fire trucks can no longer access the site. We are concerned that because they currently don't have fire access, that they could all lose their fire insurance. And so the homeowners association is currently working with Weyerhaeuser to construct a road in the northern edge of the subdivision, which would give them emergency access, but it is not yet constructed, and they're still working on that. There are several options open to fund a new bridge. Those options would be creating an LID to fund the bridge. LID would have to be accepted and put forth by the board. The county engineer would then make an assessment or decide how to assess best those properties and then present that back to the board. They could also take and borrow the money themselves. The estimated cost for the new bridge construction, they've been engaged with an engineering firm on their own, and that assessment came back at somewhere between $650,000 to $1 million to reconstruct that bridge. That's if they were able to utilize the existing abutments. The existing abutments become a very important part of the process in permitting and in the construction of the new bridge. The third option would be for RIA, the homeowners association, to actually borrow the money on its own, and as they have language within their contracts with the property owners to be able to do their own assessment. There are advantages to them being able to go out and borrow the money for the replacement on their own. If the county gets involved, then there's prevailing wage that will have to be paid, permitting process, public bidding process. All that takes additional time, and they're looking at getting this done as quickly as possible. Since we wrote the agenda item material, I've been in contact with all of the regulatory agencies, and should they be able to fund the bridge and get it constructed utilizing the existing abutments, most of them say that a permit would not be needed, which would quicken the process, because usually it was going to take 6 to 9 months to run this through the permitting process with the regulatory agencies. The county are one of the few agencies that would require a permit, and as well as Fish and Wildlife. I'd like to ask if there's any questions regarding this. We have Evelyn Mast from the RIA Homeowners Association also on the line, and she's available as well to answer any questions you might have.
See, we have a couple questions. Commissioner Bangs and then Commissioner Webb.
Yes, so just for points of clarification, I guess. To start, we do not own the bridge. If we got involved, we would end up delaying the process for them. And it sounds like they have an entity that is willing to work with them in a development of an alternative route. I'm just wondering if the logging company involved that's interested in logging that situation and bringing logs over that bridge, if somehow the homeowners association and that logging entity could work together and develop a plan so that we don't get involved and so that we don't end up delaying this process for these folks. I don't feel like that is a thoughtful situation for us to do, especially, you know, if we actually don't own it ourselves. So that's just my thoughts.
Commissioner Webb. Oh, go ahead.
The
Sorry.
bridge being a public bridge, we don't own it. The property coming in from the north end into the subdivision, they're currently working with Weyerhaeuser to try to gain that access. It's not a very long road, but what that adds is approximately another 8 miles to a fire truck, because they can't get over the existing bridge. The entity that contacted us to bring the logs out has an easement over that property to haul those logs out, and it's not Weyerhaeuser. And so whether or not he would haul his logs out through Weyerhaeuser is a question that he would have to be asked.
I guess just circling back, I'm wondering if the county could have a position here of communication or bringing entities together to find an alternative before we step in and delay this permitting process and delay this work that could potentially already be either started or because it sounds like they're doing a really good job of dealing with this themselves. And so I feel like they don't need their parents, I guess, us being the parents, to step in and try to solve something that they're already solving. So that's just my 2 cents.
Chair Quilla, members of the board, if I might interject real quick. I think I think that what Terry kind of laid out there is that certainly if the homeowners association can figure out how to get this done, which I think the wild card really is the financing part of it for them. But if they can, then certainly, you know, from an expeditious and clear-cut process, it would be favorable for them. I think the reason why the county's having this conversation is that if they aren't able to do that, then there are other options that they could initiate and then interface with the county on, and that would include the property owners agreeing to form an LID, which would be the mechanism for them to then finance the improvement. So I think that Commissioner Bangs is right that, you know, if the homeowners association can do this themselves, then from their perspective and from ours, from the counties, that would probably be preferable. But there are options where the county could be a facilitator of getting the improvement done. But the homeowners would need to agree to that and then voluntarily form an LID. So.
Thank you, County Manager. Can I, Commissioner Webb, and then we have 3 minutes before we have our regular meeting starting. So
no, so this is a quick. I was going to ask what the county's recommendation was. So thank you, Commissioner Boone, for, excuse me, Manager Boone.
And
Gary.
Can I just do a quick? Can I do a quick follow-up really fast? So if fire trucks can't get across the bridge, isn't that a state issue and not a county issue? Isn't that an ODOT issue? I don't know. I'm asking.
No, ODOT doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just an issue for the homeowners association. I've been in contact with ODOT and just to see if there was any emergency funds available to them. I've talked with Ken Chunkwater, the local planner here with ODOT, and then he did some research as well. And unfortunately, there's not. Unfortunately, the quickest, most painless method for them is to be able to fund this themselves. The problem being that once the county gets involved, if they create an LID, then potentially the county could end up putting liens against property owners that don't pay up, and then the county is in the property business. They currently have a mechanism from the homeowners association that allows them to basically place a lien, which keeps the county out of the property business. It's kind of a catch-22, but we just have jurisdiction over it, but we're under no obligation beyond that. They will be having a meeting on May 14th with all the property owners to present to them a proposal for all the property owners, I believe there's 24 of them, to put up $25,000 within 90 days. And after that meeting, Dave Fisher will contact me and let me know the results of that meeting.
Well, thank you, Terry. We're right up against the hour here. Are we ready to roll right into the regular meeting? Ready?
Mhm.
I have a question if possible.
Okay, Evelyn?
Yeah, one of the things that we wondered about was whether the county was able to put up a bond, because collecting the funds has been a problem for us with a variety of people not having the money. And that extends our time to be able to do this project. It can be up to 18 months for us to even collect the money. So I don't know if that is an option or not. Where you would put up a bond for us, we would then pay it back.
Chair Quilla, members
Go ahead.
Of the board, what I would say is that, we can circle up and discuss that and see if there are any options. It's just going to take a team of us to kind of look at that and see what the risk and the liability and the opportunity, if there is one. So we will do that, and we'll share what we find with your board and with the homeowners.
Thank you, County Manager. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, everybody. We're going to head right now into the regular meeting. The Board of Commissioners, as the governing body of Clatsop County, all county service districts for which this body so acts, is now meeting in regular session. Teresa, County Clerk, can we have or Clerk of the Board, excuse me. Teresa, can we have the roll call?
Chair Klula.
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson.
I'm here.
Commissioner Webb.
Here.
Commissioner Banks.
Here.
And Commissioner Toyoka is excused.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. We had an opportunity to review the agenda at the work session. Has anybody have any additional questions or comments? If not, we need a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Thompson moves to adopt the agenda as presented.
I second.
Move second to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify with an aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. First item is a proclamation, Emergency Medical Services Week, on page 73 of our agenda. And I think Tom Strecker, is Tom here?
Commissioner Chair Quayla, if I may.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Tom wasn't able to be here to read it this evening. He's not feeling well.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to help introduce it on his behalf.
Well, thank you, Amanda. We hope he gets better.
And he also, I just want to note that he helped with the language of the proclamation and the agenda item summary.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you. So in 1974, President Gerald Ford authorized Emergency Medical Services Week to celebrate EMS practitioners and the important work they do in our nation's communities. National Emergency Medical Services Week brings together local communities and medical personnel to honor the dedication of those who provide the day-to-day life-saving services of medicine's frontline.
Thank you, Amanda Rapicek. Is everybody's had an opportunity? Do we want to approve the resolution in order?
Mr. Chair, move to approve the resolution and order proclaiming May 15th, 2022 through May 21, 2022 as Emergency Medical Services Week and authorize the chair to sign the proclamation.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the resolution and order proclaiming May 15th, 2022 through May 21st, 22 as Emergency Medical Services Week and authorize the chair to read, then sign the proclamation. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. We had hands up, so everybody, we did see that. In the matter proclaiming May 15th, 2022 through May 21st, 2022 to be Emergency Medical Services Week. Whereas emergency medical services are a vital public service, and whereas the members of emergency medical services teams are ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury. And whereas the emergency medical services system consists of emergency physicians, emergency nurses, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, firefighters, educators, administrators, and others. And whereas the members of emergency medical services teams, whether career or volunteer, engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. Now, therefore, be it hereby resolved that Clatsop County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim May 15th, 2022 through May 21st, 2022 as Emergency Medical Services Week in Clatsop County and invites all community members to observe this year's theme, Rising to the Challenge, with appropriate ceremonies and activities, dated this 11th day of May, 2022, Board of County Commissioners for Clatsop County, Oregon. Thank you very much, Amanda. Next item is a proclamation for National Maritime Day. And we're very honored to have the mayor of Astoria, Bruce Jones, with us, Deputy Director for Columbia River Maritime Museum. Mayor Jones, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Chair Quayla, commissioners, Mr. Boone, staff, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you briefly tonight from my office here at the Columbia River Maritime Museum, where today we have celebrated our 60th anniversary, 60 years from the founding of the museum on this date in 1962. Clatsop County has always been a center of maritime activity. On Saturday, I had the privilege of making remarks at the ribbon cutting and dedication of the new Fort Astoria historic interpretive sign. And that sign begins by explaining how for thousands of years before the first Europeans arrived here, indigenous peoples maintained a thriving culture in what is now Clatsop County, based to a great extent on maritime trade and on fishing. Behind me, you should be able to see the stern-wheeler river cruise ship, American Pride. The American Pride, along with a number of other ships, carries passengers from Astoria up through the gorge and the Tri-Cities and up the Snake River to Lewiston, Idaho, weekly. And behind the American Pride in the main shipping channel and the Astoria anchorage on a daily basis, you see container ships, petrochemical tankers, bulk carriers, log ships, automobile and grain ships, towboats and barges, and they're all carrying out the international and domestic trade that plays a critical role in our local, regional, and national economy. We're very fortunate here locally that we have 2 trade schools that prepare people for maritime careers, and that we have a growing ship repair and shipbuilding industry, along with fishing and maritime supply and many related support industries. So it is very fitting and appropriate to recognize the importance of the maritime industry to Clatsop County. And I want to thank you for inviting me to participate tonight in your commemoration of National Maritime Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of maritime industry in Astoria and Clatsop County. And you certainly can't underemphasize how much goes up the river and how much it means to the entire region. So thank you, Mayor Jones. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the resolution and order proclaiming May 22nd, 2022 as National Maritime Day and authorize the chair to read, then sign the proclamation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the resolution and order proclaiming May 22nd, 2022 as National Maritime Day and authorize the chair to read, then sign the proclamation. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, we all voted, motion carries. In the matter of proclaiming May 22nd, 2022 to be National Maritime Day, whereas Clatsop County borders the Pacific Ocean to the west and Columbia River to the north, and whereas Clatsop County's maritime history and heritage are an integral part of the identity, and whereas these waters and shores were home to indigenous people with a rich maritime culture and traditions long before the first Europeans arrived. And whereas the Columbia River Bar is the gateway to a maritime transportation system which carries over 56 million tons of international trade with a cargo value of at least $23 billion. And whereas the Port of Astoria is a critical economic driver, serving the cruise ship, commercial fishing, and seafood processing, recreational boating, tourism, and other industries of benefit to the entire county. And whereas the U.S. Coast Guard home ports the cutters Alert, Steadfast, and Elm, aids to navigation team Astoria and sector Columbia River in our county. And whereas the Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria exposes over 115,000 visitors annually to our rich maritime heritage, and whereas commercial fishing accounts for over 13% of earned income in Clatsop County and supports a significant number of related industries, and whereas boat building and repair are key growing local industries requiring skilled blue-collar workers, and whereas the Department of Labor, Tongue Point Job Corps Center Seamanship Program and Clatsop Community College Maritime Science Program provide professional training for critical maritime jobs. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Clatsop County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim May 22nd, 2022 as National Maritime Day in Clatsop County and invites community members to observe this day and celebrate with the appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. Dated this 22nd day of May, 2022, Board of County Commissioners for Clatsop County, Oregon. Thank you so much, Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
Next item on the agenda is, getting back to my script, is business from the public. So this is an opportunity for anyone to give a 2-minute presentation about any item on the agenda except for public hearings or any topic of county concern that is not on the agenda. Clerk of the board, are there any members of the public who have registered to speak?
No, there are not.
Okay. Is there anybody that has joined us that would like to speak during business from the public? Okay, not seeing any. We'll go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. We've had an opportunity to review the consent calendar. Any questions, items that we want to remove from the consent calendar, or are we ready to approve?
Mr. Chair, move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
I second.
Moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar as presented. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll move on to the Commissioner Liaison reports. First, Commissioner Thompson.
Well, thank you, sir. I'd like to begin by loving on our road staff and the good neighbors in Riverside Estates, because they have been working tirelessly with great devotion to be self-reliant insofar as possible. We all know that there are a lot of county roads and bridges privately maintained public, so the public safety has to be maintained. These neighbors have been doing their best to take care of this themselves, and they've been working closely with ODOT, We talked to Brian Worley at AOC, the roads guy there, who we've been looking for every way we can help them, and they have been wonderful in the whole process. I'm delighted to hear the county manager talk about moving forward together with them, because they deserve all the help and support we can give. That's number one. We just talked about the indigenous peoples who were here. Number two, I had the honor, along with Sheriff Phillips and Andy Smith and Mark, the good staffer from Columbia County, to attend a ceremony held by the members of the Chinook tribe at Clatsop Community College, with a beautiful cedar carving as part of our water roundtable work. It was very, very moving ceremony to talk about people rooted on the planet and being conscious of their impact on the planet, especially the waters and the fish and everything, and that connection with the divine creator. So the singing, the dancing, the drumming, and the speeches were all profoundly impactful. I'm honored to have been able to witness that. Number three, we are still working on short-term rental issues, but in the nature of approaching the tourism management group to take advantage of their expertise, so that we can look to have an agreement that creates a level playing field, so that no business is disadvantaged, and that level playing field would extend from Clatsop through Tillamook down into Lincoln County. We're just contemplating this. We're starting to work in that direction. I don't know to what extent the rest of the commissioners need to be involved with that, unless you're interested in that, but it's close to me, and I'm carrying forward in that effort, just so that you know that that's happening. Mr. Chair, that's my report for today.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Webb.
Yes, thank you, Chair Quayla. Yes, a couple of exciting things. I hope you have all received your invitation to the groundbreaking for Trillium House, NOAA's latest project in Clatsop County. It's June 7th, and I hope that you have all been invited to it. We're also involving our new public information officer in plans for the opening, and I think it's going to be a great event. Earlier this week, I had the wonderful opportunity to walk through the Astoria Middle School unveiling of their pretty wonderful completely redesign and rebuilding of the middle school. It was this past Monday, and next Monday they're doing a similar early evening tour of the high school. This has been another one of those amazingly efficient, well done public works projects. The school district bond measure was very successful, and they've done, in the midst of COVID and the constraints of construction during COVID, they did a wonderful job. And I think that as often is the case, we are very proud to have a school district that is functioning so well, especially with construction constraints. Lastly, this Saturday is the last of the Astoria housing, what they're calling housing development listening sessions. And it's at 10 o'clock at the Barbie Center this Saturday. So I think that for now, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Bangs.
Well, I'm going to keep it pretty short and sweet. I've had 2 CFTLC meetings in the last couple weeks. just discussing the future of Clatsop County and the HCP. I was able to finally meet with the Board of Forestry in kind of a listening session for about an hour. And we were able to hopefully start creating relationships with the Board of Forestry, especially since they have a number of new members. So the situation is still evolving, but I will have a request in front of the board here soon in regards to a public comment that I would like our county to enter into the NEPA process. And I am also requesting any of the small districts that I speak to, the small taxing districts, to also enter their own comments into the NEPA process. So we shall see how all of that continues to evolve. But I will have to say it was an 1,850 page document, and it read exactly like an 1,850 page document. And it was a hefty one to digest, but I was grateful that I was able to do so, and in a manner that I could understand. And it was a good discussion that we were able to have. And I was grateful also to Commissioner Thompson for participating in the first of two of those CFTLC's meetings with me, and being able to hear and see and just be a backup for our county. That was very appreciative on my part. And then just attending my regular meetings. It's budget season in almost every forum. And so my eyeballs are a little bit tired of looking at numbers. Other than that, we had Fairway in this weekend. That went off without a hitch. It was extremely efficient. I got beat up by a goat, so I'm sorry, Commissioner, for not being able to attend your fundraiser this past weekend. The goat won. Let's just put it that way. But other than that, that's all for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. We did miss you this Saturday, but I did want to remind everybody we're going to have the joint work session with the Astoria, Cannon Beach, Gearhart, Seaside, and Morton City Councils on May 18th at 5 o'clock out at the fairgrounds. So an in-person meeting with them. I think probably county manager is going to mention that as well. And then on the 23rd, we're going to have that half-day childcare work session with the childcare task force. I think there's a lot of things that we'll want to obviously add to the agenda when we get closer, because I think Little Sprouts and the transition over to Bumble is something that's fresh on everybody's mind. And I know that they have some requests specific of hospitals, and I think of the county as well, to see if they can get a little assistance to kind of tide them over until September. But yeah, it'll be an interesting session, and I hope that we get some good action items out of that and steps to move forward. And that's all I have. I'll turn it over to County Manager.
Thank you, Chair Coelho, members of the board, and thank you, Chair Coelho, for mentioning the 18th session with the cities. Just a reminder for any of the public that's on, there will be a continuation of the budget committee meeting at 1 o'clock tomorrow, Thursday afternoon. So that'll be available via Zoom. I did want to thank Gail for her introduction of the accessory dwelling unit. As you can imagine, Gail's staff has been very busy lately, and that work I don't think is going to slow down anytime soon. But I think that bringing up the ADU topic is important for the county. As you know, from the affordable housing report, many of the recommendations, in fact, the bulk of them really address what the cities needed to consider regarding housing. The county, because of our rural nature, was really kind of a secondary consideration with a lot of the recommendations. And that's not surprising, because the assumption is that most of the affordable housing will be built within cities. But ADUs is one of those areas that the rural areas can contribute. And so I'm drafting a discussion paper for the board that really talks about the county's role with affordable housing, because I think there's just there's a benefit for us being really clear. As your board knows, cities are autonomous statutory organizations that have authority over their geographic boundaries. And sometimes people assume the county has some kind of a higher authority, but we really don't. And the county's ordinances don't apply in cities unless the cities agree. And so I think it's really important for all of us to understand how the county can certainly help cities, and we can convene stakeholder groups, and certainly the county can help fund, and we can certainly help with the rural areas. But part of this discussion paper will also lay out kind of what are those things we can get done in short order to hopefully start moving the needle. So I'll be giving that to you in a draft form in the next week or so, and hopefully it'll just spur some additional conversation and some feedback from the board as we move forward. And then the other is that as part of our housing approach, on May 13th is the deadline for the expressions of interest on those county properties that were identified as potential uses for housing, childcare, and or other social services. And so we'll see what comes through that door, and what comes through is just an initial expression of interest. There'll be a lot of discernment between the county and the cities and the proposing agency on what's really possible. So that's all that I have, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, County Manager. We'll move on to the public hearings this evening. First item is the appeal of Planning Commission decision Velasquez CUP on page 143. If we all get there, I'll go ahead and call the board to announce any declarations of bias or any ex parte contacts on behalf of the commission. Is there any member of the audience who objects to any member of the board hearing this matter? If not, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. So this is a hearing to be held on the existing record. So the staff will summarize the application first, and then second, the applicant will be heard. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to staff and Ian Sisson, who is our senior planner. Ian.
Thank you, Chair Quila. Good evening, commissioners. Pulling up a presentation here. I will keep it brief for you since you've seen this before. As you might remember, you established the scope of review for this appeal back in March. And as Chair Quila had noted, that will be just the record, the existing record, so no new information. The record was included in your packet today, so you have the original staff report and recommendation, as well as the notice of decision from the Planning Commission and a copy of their minutes from their February meeting where this application was denied. So to reintroduce the application to you, the applicants were Jose Antonio Velasquez Silva and Susana Juanosta. They are here this evening with their attorney, Mr. Greg Hathaway. And Mr. Velasquez operates a home improvement contracting business out of his home. Most of their work takes place on job sites away from that property. The property is located at 37074 West Campbell Loop, which is just off Highway 26, about 2.5 miles east of the junction. The property is used for office space and storage of materials, and as sort of a dispatch for employees to come pick up materials, drop them off, and various other activities like that. The business has actually operated on this property for about 6 years. However, the required conditional use permit was never obtained. Although Mr. Velasquez did respond to a code compliance inquiry back in 2015 and submitted an application at that time for the conditional use permit, but a hearing was never held on that matter for some reason, which is unclear to me at this point. However, we do know that our code compliance staff became involved again last year, and that was at the request of a neighbor who had some complaints about the operation and some other unpermitted construction activity that was happening. So this application was submitted to resolve the violation of operating the home occupation without the conditional use permit. Because of the history with the property and unpermitted activity, as well as some of the comments that we received from neighbors who had concerns and were opposed to approval, the item was placed on the Planning Commission's agenda for a public hearing. Normally, this type of application would be reviewed administratively and approved or denied by the Community Development Director. So again, the Planning Commission held their public hearing in February on the 8th, and a number of comments were received prior to the hearing, both in favor of the application and against the application. The Planning Commission ultimately effectively denied the permit or the application based on a 2-2 vote. And so that defaulted to a denial. And essentially the reasons for opposition to approval of the application were that we have a definition of home occupations, which states that home occupations will employ no more than 5 full or part-time persons. And according to the applicant during the hearing, the business employs 17. However, not all 17 are on the property at the same time. And then the other issue was that we have a standard in the development code that no more than 2 vehicles or trailers are to be used in the operation of a home occupation. And one of the neighbors who was opposed to the application had submitted photos from the past where there were 4 work vans located on the property at the same time. So Mr. Velasquez and Ms. Wanosta filed their notice of appeal on February 22nd, and they identified 3 issues. The first being that the Planning Commission denied the request based on a tie vote. Second being that the Planning Commission did not provide any findings to support denial of the application. And third, that the Planning Commission should have continued the hearing so that the absent members of that commission could have participated. So the appellants have requested that your board review on the record as you have decided to do, and then they are requesting that you reverse the Planning Commission's decision. So you do have the option to do that tonight, and that would sort of lay the matter to rest unless the neighbors decide to appeal, and an appeal would go to the State Land Use Board of Appeals, or LUBA, at this point. So you do have that option. If you determine, based on the existing record, that you disagree with the Planning Commission's conclusions related to denial, which again were the number of employees and the number of vehicles. That's essentially what it boiled down to. Your other options would be to affirm the Planning Commission's decision and deny the appeal, or to modify the Planning Commission's decision in whole or in part, and you would need to create some findings to state your reasons for taking that action. And then the last option would be to remand the decision back to the Planning Commission with an explanation for the remand and what action the Planning Commission would need to take to resolve that issue. So that is the summary I have for you this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for our senior planner? I'm not seeing, oh, I do see one. Commissioner Banks.
So I noticed the Planning Commission didn't have their full board present in this decision. And I also noticed that they did not take the staff recommendations in this decision. And so I guess I just wanted to clarify before we go any further.
That's correct, Commissioner Bangs. The staff report did recommend approval of the application, and during the hearing, we described that, on the issue of number of employees, that our interpretation has been that means the number of employees on the property at any time. And that would go, the same logic would go for the number of vehicles, that they would be limited to 2 vehicles on the property at any time. And so our findings in the staff report and our recommendation were based on the ability or the perceived ability of the applicant to comply with those rules in the future moving forward. So if they were to approve that permit, violations of the permit conditions and any other regulations in our code would apply, and so any violations to that would potentially result in revocation of the permit. So essentially our recommendation was based on the belief that the business could comply with the rules, and to give them a chance to do that with the permit in hand. And if any issues were to arise, then we would resolve that through our code compliance procedures.
Okay, I appreciate your description. I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, I would sure hate to have a neighbor come look at my driveway and the number of vehicles that are parked out there, and we're not even running a business. But it's yeah, I appreciate your description. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bangs. Any other questions, Commissioner Thompson?
I don't know if I have a question. It's just a comment. When I read Freud, he said the most virulent arguments we have the biggest arguments with our cousins. I think he hadn't participated in land use issues in Clatsop County, or he would have had a different opinion. It was so interesting to read the different comments from the different neighbors. It was hard to see where the middle ground was. And I assume that when staff developed their recommendations, you were not disputing anyone's validity, but what you were doing was redefining the conditions of satisfaction necessary to issue the license. Is that correct?
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. I would say that many of the comments that were provided in opposition to the request were based on those neighbors' experiences over the past 6 years while the business has operated without permits, and may not have been aware of the applicable code requirements, and obviously wouldn't have had a permit that had conditions of approval attached to it to operate under. And so we took those comments with a bit of a grain of salt, because again, if the permit were to be approved, there would obviously be the expectation that the conditions of approval would be followed, and that the applicable regulations would be available to the applicant, and that they would be made well aware of those. And again, just that the expectations for how the business was allowed to operate would be clear for everyone, including the neighbors. And so, again, some of those comments that were opposed were definitely based off of previous experiences, and maybe the expectation that even if the permit is approved, that the rules may continue to be broken. But again, our position was that we would give the business an opportunity to approval would give the business an opportunity to continue to operate, but that the expectations would be made explicitly clear, and that any issues would be resolved through code compliance, and that the permit could ultimately be revoked.
Thank you, Senior Planner. And this is the opportunity to gain clarity and ask questions of our Senior Planner, but we do still have the opportunity to hear from our applicant and any opponents. So just a reminder, Commissioner Banks.
I just want to take a moment and say how much I appreciate our Senior Planner in this discussion, and his efforts of communication between the business owner and those that are surrounding. I feel that I feel that the direction that our staff was going with this is a really good direction. Like, this level of communication, this level of transparency, this level of giving folks a chance, I fully support that perspective. And so I'm just really grateful to see it.
Thank you, Commissioner Bangs. Any other questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on then. We will move to the applicant or a representative. This is their opportunity to be heard. Who will be speaking on behalf of the applicant of the application?
Mr. Chair and members of the board, my name is Greg Hathaway, and I'm going to represent the appellants tonight.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation. For the record, again, Greg Hathaway. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Hathaway Larson. We're located at 1125 Cooch Street, Suite 550 in Portland, 97209. And I've been retained by the Velasquez's to represent them tonight before your board. A couple of comments, I think, just to get started with my presentation, because there's really been already a pretty good conversation from Ian and then also from your board about really what we're trying to accomplish here tonight. Because what's kind of unusual about what's happened at the Planning Commission is there was a choose-to vote, and technically and legally a choose-to vote means a denial without it really being like a full denial with findings. So the only option and choice that the Velasquez's had was to appeal to your board. And we requested that it just be on the record without any new evidence coming in, because we didn't believe that there was a need to add to any of the record that was established before the Planning Commission. So this is kind of a unique situation before your board, because you don't really have a real decision from the Planning Commission. You have a tie vote, which means a denial. The second thing I wanted to talk about, though, is a comment that Commissioner Bangs mentioned, and I think this is important here. There needs to be a balance between the Velasquez's wanting to preserve their business, which is obviously very, very important to them. But on the other hand, there's a need to make sure that the neighbors are being protected as well. And I've read the testimony from below, and I believe the comments made by the neighbors concerned about the business are very heartfelt and need to be taken very seriously. And so we're trying to figure out through this land use process how we can balance the need to preserve the Velasquez's business in compliance with your code, but at the same time also protect the neighbors so that they're not adversely impacted. And I think that's really important here. And in that regard, I had a long conversation with Mr. Velasquez this week in preparation for the hearing. And I explained to Mr. Velasquez that, and I've been doing land use law throughout the state of Oregon for many, many years. I used to be county counsel for Washington County, Oregon, here in Portland. So I'm very familiar with the process. I've appeared in Clatsop County before and the city of Astoria. In fact, I grew up in Tillamook, so I grew up on the North Oregon coast. But what's really important about my conversation with Mr. Velasquez was I said, the staff is supporting you, but the staff's only supporting you if you can comply with these conditions of approval. And the conditions of approval, to a large degree, come from two places. One, specifically from your code that defines limitations on home occupations. And second of all, addressing concerns by the neighbors. And there's a long list of conditions that would be imposed if your board were to approve this home occupation conditional use permit. And I reviewed each one of the conditions with Mr. Velasquez, and I wanted to make sure myself, before I spoke with you tonight, that he, first of all, understood the conditions. And then second of all, is that he said he could comply with the conditions. And he said, I understand them, and we intend to comply with them. And I said, if you don't comply, technically that's an enforcement issue, and the county could revoke your conditional use permit, and you would lose your business. So the consequences of not complying with those conditions of approval are pretty serious, especially if you want to stay in business. So Mr. Velasquez promised me that I could represent to you tonight that he understands those conditions and that he's prepared to satisfy and comply with those conditions so that he could preserve his business and also try to be a good neighbor. Now, I think what's important here, again, is we're trying to balance preserving the business but protecting the neighborhood, is what staff is recommending to you demonstrates compliance with your code. The conditions being imposed ensure compliance with your code and protection of the neighbors. I'm representing to you tonight that Mr. Velasquez and his wife are prepared to comply with those conditions. And for those reasons, we're asking your board tonight to support the staff report, to support the comments by Ian, and to adopt the findings from the staff report along with all the conditions of approval. We believe very strongly that if you do that, you're in compliance with your own code. You allow the business to continue, but you also protect those neighbors. And so we would strongly support and urge your board to adopt the staff report. And we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Hathaway. Do we have any questions? All right. And do we have anyone else speaking on behalf of the applicant? If not, we'll go ahead and allow the opponent or representative to be heard. Dale?
Dale Barrett, neighbor, live at 34107 West Campbell Loop, kind of catty corner from the applicant. Lived here for 34 years, so kind of know the neighborhood pretty well. I wrote a letter, which is all part of the record. Hopefully all of you read that. It was dated December 10th, 2021, outlining my concerns, mainly the truck traffic that's coming in, has been for the last 5 years. You may or may not know, but Edgewater Terrace Road, West Campbell Loop, is a private road. It is not maintained by the county. It's maintained by the homeowners association. So by approving your conditional use permit, it will allow the extra traffic that has been coming in, not only the 5 or 6 vans that he has, but also other vehicles. Like today, I observed a van came in and unloaded some construction debris that was not one of the owner's vans. It was somebody else. Seen deliveries of doors today, things like that. So even though we say that we're going to have the conditions of approval that only allow 2 vehicles and no more than 5 people, I ran a business too with, probably 5 or 6 crews. I didn't have them come through my neighborhood because it wouldn't have been fair for the neighbors to pay for the use of the road with all my commercial traffic. The applicant actually has property in Gearhart that is zoned commercial. He's starting to use it a little bit, but the business can operate on that commercial property legally without having to approve this conditional use for his convenience, just to have the vehicles come by his house here. Those are some of my biggest concerns. I have tried to talk to Mr. Velasquez about being a good neighbor. I told him I would rather do that than file complaints if he's not following the rules. His only comment back to me at the time was he didn't really care what his neighbors thought. So, very frustrating. I tried to work with him. That hasn't happened. So had to start filing a complaint to get the attention, because it has been at least 5 years that I've talked to the planning department to get him into compliance, so we wouldn't have 5 and 6 vehicles there at a time. We wouldn't have 2 or 3 employees' cars. we wouldn't have 4 vans there and all the traffic that's coming and going. You know, Edgewater Terrace Road is a small 18-foot wide paved road. There are a lot of people in the subdivision, over 20 homes here that like to walk up and down the road. I got 2 grandkids here that like to ride their bicycles. And it just really doesn't mix well with the commercial traffic. Worst of all is when they're burning their construction debris. It's very stinky. It must be burning some things like plastics and rubbers, rubber products. Home construction debris is what it is. I even went to the planning department and they said, well, you'll have to contact DEQ in Portland. We can't handle it. I went to the fire department. They said, well, yeah, we'll talk to them about it, not doing it, but it didn't make any difference. They're still burning debris with smoke blowing over. You know, if it was just some home stuff with some tree limbs, that kind of stuff, we all do that. That's not the complaint. So I personally don't believe he will be able to follow the guidelines of the staff's recommendations for conditions of approval. He can't control other people coming onto the property or necessarily his employees. I've had crews in my business that they would take off, go down the road, they'd forget something, come back, another truck would come in at the same time. You got 17 employees and 5 or 6 vans. It's inevitable that they'll be coming in. It's just going to continue to cause, you know, frustration, and you'd have to file complaints. I don't think the planning staff needs that, and as a neighbor, I don't need it. So I hope you'll understand, with 17 employees and that big of a business, he actually has 2 registered businesses. It's just too big for a neighborhood like what we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale Barrett. We have now an opportunity for a rebuttal by the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission, and thank you, Mr. Barrett. I think we can all put ourselves in Mr. Barrett's shoes, and I appreciate his honesty. I think his testimony was incredibly sincere, and I don't think anybody can question the comments that he's just made. I'm just trying to figure out how this board can approve this occupational use at this house subject to the staff conditions and also satisfy Mr. Barrett. Staff is saying, and Ian may want to comment on this after we're through, but staff basically says that they believe that the conditions can be complied with and he is going to be able to operate his business. And the key here is if you adopt the staff report with those conditions, then technically the request complies with your code. And there really isn't a basis for denial. There might be enforcement issues later, which we hope wouldn't happen. But you need to decide tonight whether or not, if approved, those conditions can be complied with. We're saying they can. Mr. Valquez is saying they can. Ian's saying they can. And I think we'd like the opportunity to be able to, I guess, show the neighbors that in fact they can. Now, he raised a couple of questions that maybe Ian could help us with, because I've reviewed those conditions of approval pretty well, but there's a lot of them. But one thing, Ian, that we probably need to address is whether or not the conditions of approval that the staff is recommending addresses the delivery of commercial deliveries to the property itself, and if there's any limitation on that. I think we need to discuss that to see if the conditions right now permit something like that, or if we need to think about another condition that addresses that issue. We also need to address the burning issue that Mr. Barrett talked about, and whether or not there's some condition that we can talk about that could be imposed that would not create some adverse impact with that kind of a situation Mr. Barrett's talking about. So I think there's opportunities here to bring both sides together, to prove it with conditions, give it a chance, and I guess have Mr. Velazquez honor his representations to me that he intends to comply with the conditions and he intends to be a good neighbor. And why is that important to him? Because he needs that home occupation to be able to maintain his business. That's what he has represented to me, and I think that's what he's representing to you tonight. And so it's important for him to comply with the conditions. And again, before this hearing this week, I asked him, do you understand the conditions? And are you willing to comply with the conditions? And the answer to both was, yes, I can, and yes, I will do that. So there's a couple of things that Mr. Barrett raised that maybe Ian can respond to. And we're willing to have a conversation tonight with the board to make sure that the neighbors are being protected and that Mr. Velazquez can protect his business.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hathaway. Do we have any additional questions from the board? If not, I will go ahead and close the public hearing at this time. This is the opportunity now for deliberation of the board. And this is, again, on the record only, so there is no additional testimony. Commissioner Banks, do you have a question?
I'm just ready for board deliberation. So I guess I'm just looking at this from the perspective of I do not want to close a business that employs 17 people without giving them a chance to comply. And also, you know, giving this situation, I feel like our staff has taken a really progressive approach in assisting this landowner in hopefully future success. So, I mean, that's just the direction I'm leaning. Is I would love to see this business remain open. I would love to see this landowner have a chance to comply before removing their ability to operate. And that's just my personal thoughts on the matter.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Banks. Do we have any other? Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you, sir. Well, I agree. I think everyone sympathizes with a neighbor who has a condition that is infuriating or causing great concern, and yet legally entitled this neighbor, the Velazquez, they're entitled to operate if they do so legally. Inquiring minds wonder what happened with his initial application, but we can't revisit that. It's fruitless. So now we have a chance with clear conditions to operate in a way that balances neighborhood livability and the legal rights to operate their business. I looked at the record. I thought it presented two very divergent points of view about the Velazquez and, you know, about their efforts to be good neighbors and to pay extra to make up for the wear and tear on the streets by paying additional amounts to it. I saw several neighbors who thought they were excellent neighbors. I saw some other comments that they were not. So those kinds of situations are very challenging. What we can do is support the staff recommendation, which I think was thorough and made very reasonable, clear expectations for accountability for the balance of neighborhood livability and the economic survival of a business that they're legally entitled to have. So I support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Webb?
Yeah, I concur with with the two commissioners who have spoken. I would definitely support the staff recommendation. I think they went more than the extra mile to be accommodating to all of the views. And I really found the staff report, as usual, to be very, very good. So I support the accepting the recommendation of the staff on this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Webb. I guess my issue is if there is another property in Gearhart that is commercially zoned that the Velasquez owns, that activity should maybe be going on there rather than in a residence. And I know on my street, and just personally speaking, I don't want to have a lot of business activity in cars and trucks where my girls are playing and trying to ride their bikes. That certainly isn't compatible with the residential zone. And that is one of the issues here that I think that kind of lingers. So we have the question, we sounds like we have folks that want to reverse, or at least want to reverse the decision of the Planning Commission. There is the other option of remanding it back to the Planning Commission, where there could be some additional investigation into some of these issues. Commissioner Banks?
So I don't really want to kick the rock in a circle. I'd much rather be done with the issue and allow the landowners their option of success or failure going forward regarding the suggestions given by staff. I feel like it'll be a pretty clear either it's successful or it's not. But we have done our due diligence as a commission and as our county staff of trying to serve both entities. So that's just my thought.
Okay, Commissioner Thompson?
Agreed. There's nothing more to be learned from this and extending this process any further. Move forward.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
Chair Aquila, if I could interject for a moment. If there is a motion to reverse the Planning Commission's decision, I just want to remind your board that we do need findings to state the board's reason for that action. And so, I think you would probably want those based upon potentially if you had a different interpretation of the two issues that the Planning Commission raised in denying the application, or at least the two folks who voted against approving the application raised those two issues. So there was the issue of the number of employees and the issue of the number of vehicles. And those were the reasons behind the two no votes. And so that might be what you focus your findings on, and I'm happy to assist with that if you end up having a motion to go that direction.
Okay. And then before we go to Commissioner Banks, County Council, did you have something you wanted to add at this time?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Banks?
I agree with staff regarding the 17 employees. They're not 17 on-site employees. They're not sitting there on the property for the term of their employment of the day. They are, this sounds like it's kind of a home-based for a business. And so I agree with staff's and analysis of that employee number not quite fitting how our ordinance is written. And I agree with how they've translated it. And then in regards to the vehicles on the property, I also concur with staff's observations of giving these folks a chance to comply with the ordinance. There was no communication with these landowners prior to this, I feel like, and I feel like that was also given in the staff report. And so for me, I really feel like now that we've had clear, transparent conversation, let's give these folks a chance.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Banks. And I'm just going to say, I guess I would feel more comfortable remanding it back just because I would like to see if they have an alternative property that could be used for commercial activity. I would like that to be explored more and not have that creep into a neighborhood if at all possible. And I know that that happens. And I know that I've had businesses as well that, you know, you start bringing things at home that probably should be left at your commercial property. Commissioner Thompson.
Well, I appreciate that because nobody wants to have their neighborhood turned into a business area, and unless we choose that. On the other hand, the conditions have never been clear. And what we've been through is a months-long process. I objected to the Planning's Commission moving forward on it instead of just waiting for when they could really vote on this and make a decision. But, you know, whatever happened. I'd like to, this is a fresh start. This is an opportunity to do a do-over. I think that that the business owners and their attorney hear your concerns. They hear the constraints of staff. I would like to ease up on the investment of staff time and energy and give this a chance to work out, hearing everyone's concerns, because we do want to maintain neighborhood livability. We do want to support small business growth and development. How do we do both in ways that are appropriate? I hear your concerns. I'm pretty sure they and their attorney hear them as well. So I would still like to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Webb, did you want something? Or I see that Senior Planner East Assistant had something.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Quila. I just wanted to point out that you know, you have the record before you tonight, and the record lays out the applicable review criteria for a conditional use home occupation application. And I just wanted to point out that we do not evaluate what other property an applicant holds. We only review the proposed use for the subject property. So the criteria don't include any analysis of what other property might be available for a particular use.
I see Commissioner Thompson.
So I would have been guilty of design review in the business sense. Thank you for holding us to the law, Planner Sisson.
Okay, any further discussion on this? And I, just so everybody knows, I understand the issue here. I am going to vote to remand it back just because that's my choice. I would like to have a little more discussion at the Planning Commission and let them do their job. But motion?
I move that we repeal the Planning Commission decision and allow and follow our staff recommendation with the citing of the previous opinions regarding the two concerns that were addressed during the Planning Commission meeting. Senior Planner, does that suffice for a motion?
I'll double check with County Council, but I believe so. And I understand the intent of your motion and the issues that you wanted to include in the findings. Yes.
Yes, staff understands that to be reverse. Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, moved and seconded to reverse the Planning Commission decision in the matter of Velasquez CUP, stating the findings of, I guess it was vehicles and number of employees. Is that correct? Okay, all those in favor signify with an aye.
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 Okay, all those opposed? No. Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to our next item, which is ordinance number 22-04, Clatsop County Code Amendments, Compliance Procedures and Noise Control Standards, page 219. And Our Community Development Director, Gail Hendrickson, is presenting on this. I'll turn it over to Gail.
Okay, thank you, Board and Chair. These are some revisions to our Clatsop County Code designed to work with our code compliance procedures. Basically, what they will be doing, these amendments would do, is update code citations, update state statutes, clarify how the code compliance process works, establish a clear path when a hearings officer hearing can be scheduled either by staff or by the person who may be in violation of the code. And then finally, to transfer responsibility for enforcement of the noise ordinance back from code compliance back over to the sheriff's office. We did bring a draft of these same amendments before your board at a work session on April 6th. You did not have any changes or recommendations for other revisions at that time. So the ordinance that is before you this evening is the same that you saw on April 6th. We are recommending approval. This would be the first public hearing. And if this moves forward this evening, your second public hearing would be scheduled for your last meeting at the end of May. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions of staff? Okay, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Clerk of the board, are there any members of the public who have registered to speak?
No, there are not.
Okay, is there anybody that has joined us that would like to speak on this matter? Okay, not seeing or hearing anyone, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time. Any discussion from the commission? Commissioner Banks.
I just wanted to mention that I find the irony in this timing, because I just had a message from a constituent out in Clatsop Plains that was concerned about construction noises starting before 7 a.m. And so I just, you know, the irony or the timing, it's impressive. The timing is impressive.
Any other comments, questions? Any other discussion? If not, we'll need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board conduct the first reading of ordinance 22-04 by title only.
Seconded, I see it. It's been moved and seconded that the board conduct the first reading of ordinance number. Sorry?
Who seconded the motion?
It was Commissioner Webb.
Oh, thank you.
It's been moved and seconded that the board conduct the first reading of ordinance number 22-04 by title only. All those in favor signify with an aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Council, will you read the ordinance by title only?
An ordinance amending sections 1.11, 1.12, 5.12, 8.04, and 8.12 Clatsop County Code, and creating section 1.14 Code Compliance Hearing Procedures.
Thank you, County Council. All right, that concludes the business agenda this evening. Thank you, Gail. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? All right, just a reminder, we do have an executive session. So the board will now meet in executive session. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660 subset 2, subset E, to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated persons shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, the Board of Commissioners will adjourn. Okay. Mr. Webb?
Yeah. Could we possibly take a 5-minute break?
Sure.
We've been at this, like for a long
day?
time.
all day.
Just 5 minutes.
And there is a DBS on the call. I don't know who that is.
Sure, Commissioner Webb, yeah, if you need to, yeah, take a break there, we'll convene here real quick.
Okay.
Are we still recording?
We are still streaming on YouTube, it looks like from my end.